Hi, Evert. Lovely to have you for this interview. Thank you so much for your time. First of all, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Evert Pruis. I'm an entrepreneur. I founded my own company about 10 years ago called Forces. We're actually active on the in-between between change and learning. So we actually use learning as a vehicle for change processes in organizations. I speak at the Association for Talent Development in the US annually at their global conference. Well, that's the brief one.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for taking the time out to speak to me today. What I'm looking to dive into with you in this interview is the problem that we have around the subject of education, because I know that's passionate, something you're passionate about. So I guess if we start there, how would you sort of describe the big problems, the wicked problems, if we could call them that, with the current state of education?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, and that's not even current. Yeats had a wonderful saying where he said, "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." For me, education has become so entrenched in having content poured into you, like into a pail, instead of lighting some of that unique human quality and human talent that is innate in every one of us. But is education curious about flourishing, or is it just a mechanism for pouring knowledge that's already outdated when it's being poured into students?
So what I think is fantastic about that is what you're saying is that education is pouring knowledge into us, but I guess the issue is we've got Google nowadays, right? So we can find some information, we can find some of that stuff out if it exists in the world quite quickly. So why do we need that in our heads, I guess, is the question, like going forward into the future. How does education cope with that? And so do you think that there are major changes needed in education?
It's actually built for a purpose that fitted 150 years ago. When we started industrialization, the education that we have now is wonderful. It actually equipped people wonderfully to go into that industrial age. Now, robotic age, that's a different matter.
No, I love that. And you're absolutely right. If you actually think, at least here, I'm in the UK, right? So the average school here in the UK, right, still has uniforms. It has departments. People still ring bells to change things. These are all the Industrial Revolution. And when you think about it, batches of classes, they're kind of rubber stamped, like you're the batch of 2020, off you go. And it's so bizarre because if I said, like, as a corporation, right, we're just going to put all the 32-year-olds, they're all going to get together and work together on floor number 15, right? You never do that. You always intermingle skills. You always there's creativity. There's much more organicness to education outside of the education system. Is that also what you see?
Completely. And just to contrast the context of the times now and the times of the future, you see problems becoming more wicked, more complex, more diverse. They don't just need one skill set that I might have, but they need skills of 20, 30 people that are even geographically not aligned, not even in time. So we need to be able to cooperate based on talent and passion, rather than slotting into a part of a production line where I can do the same work day in, day out, decade in, decade out. That's, I think, the contrast that we're equipping our students for. We're equipping them for a task they did 150 years ago in a future that's going to be completely different.
Because the robots are going to do that, right? The robots are going to do those tasks that you can do over and over again. What does the human do in that instance, Evert? What do you think? What do you think the future for humans is going to be like? Like, what part do we play in that robotic era that's coming?
Well, so many bright minds have thought about this pretty wicked question. what I think a more fundamental question is, if you take away robotics just for a moment and ask people whether they find that their talents are flourishing, whether their unique qualities are being grown, whether they feel that they can still learn and adapt to new circumstances. I think it starts with that. It starts with igniting new potential in people, because what we think is work now, probably in 5 years is not going to be work anymore. I have a secretary who plans my schedule. How long is that still going to be a viable thing to do? So if we flourish her, maybe she'll find a new job, a new passion, a new fulfillment in life.
That's really interesting. Yeah, there's so many jobs when you think about driving. You know, soon there'll be automated drivers in cars, you know, that we don't have drivers in. Any factory, you know, we'll have robots controlling that. And as you say, the humans, let's be honest, in those factories, if we can call them that, they weren't at their full potential, right? Really, were they? Right? You know, miners, you know, like my ancestors going back 3-4 generations, we were in mines, right? Were they fulfilled? I can tell you, no, they were not fulfilled. They were not happy at all. So I guess, although we could look at it negatively, it actually opens up a lot of possibility for humankind, the new era that's coming, in a positive way. So let's just get back down to education then. What are your thoughts in terms of how we begin to prepare people for that, you know, for this, well, the era we're living in now, but, you know, for that future where things are changing so rapidly, knowledge is less important because we can access it in other ways, and robots are doing the menial tasks, if we can use that very loosely. What are your thoughts around how we can prepare people through an education for that new era?
Let me just start with what I see now in education. What I see now in education is that we prepare students to be productive. We prepare them to be to get things done. That's markedly different, neurologically speaking, from being creative. Creative is about setting time where actually you don't know where you're going. It feels like being in the trenches, in the dragon pit. You feel insecure, you feel hopeless for quite a long time before you come up with a brilliant idea. So I think teaching people, opening up schools as creative spaces to create something that's not there yet, to allow for that multidisciplinary collaboration, even across time zones, to get some of that wickedness done, that is going to start to transform education into something that's going to be fit for the future.
I think that's powerful. It would take a brave school or a brave, you know, organization to begin that process. But yeah, I think it's needed, isn't it? Right. Let me ask you another. Let's just shift gear a little bit. If we come back to today, one of the things that I wanted your thoughts about was, if you take a step back from education here in just the West, if we look globally, do you have any thoughts around how it could be improved on a global basis?
Now it's something that interests me enormously. I've had the wonderful opportunity to speak for the ATD also in Taipei in the East. And I was very curious about the differences in cultures. What I find, though, is that the Western model of productivity, of actually cramming as much knowledge and skills into students, is pervasive. It's become pervasive around the world. If you take the South Korean education system or the Japanese education, Chinese, they learn from such a young age that learning is cramming and exercising for exams, actually. That is not what education should be going to if we want to be fit for the future. So are there any positive examples globally? Yeah, there are. There is a school in Japan, you could probably Google it, the School Without Walls. They've actually studied behavior of young children, and they found that young children actually like to run. So the headmaster said, okay, I want to put in an architect, get rid of all the walls, get rid of all the classes, get rid of all the age group distinctions, and we just let teachers meander around where groups flock to learn something. I think these, it gives me goosebumps, but these examples are hopeful, I think.
Yeah, it sounds very radical and quite exciting. I think what you're talking about, interestingly, is, um, you know, uh, it's kind of like when somebody leaves the education system, which is filling their brain with knowledge, and they leave that system. I guess they think that they are, one danger could be that they think they are then educated, right? And that's it. I'm educated now. Like, I'm done. Like, I'm fine. I know everything there is to know. But the truth is, life is very different to that, isn't it? Lifelong learning is what we're perhaps not teaching. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you're completely right. And I think it's even more perverse, because if you do something you really don't like, so if cramming is not a very pleasant activity, is it? I mean,
No.
I had to do it at university, but I didn't like it very much. So the moment you're done with it, you think, oh, I'm never going to go back to that, right? So you actually equate learning with cramming, and then you think, maybe I'm going to get rid of the learning altogether. But I think learning is not that. So not only does it do something perverse in terms of what I actually learned in my first year in college is probably going to be outdated in my third year or fourth year. The moment I graduate, it's already old knowledge. It also does something with our sense of joy in learning.
Yeah, and talk to me a little bit about creativity, because how do you grade somebody's levels of creativity? Is grading a thing you see in the new world, or is it, how do you sort of assess that?
Well, I think a very simple answer to this one is, if you ask somebody day in, day out, how different are your days? How different are your activities? How often do you experiment with things you've never done before? How often do you actually put yourself on the line to start learning in order to do something completely different? How often do you write a proposal in my work to help an organization change, where you don't borrow from what your colleagues have done or what you've done earlier, or actually sit down with a blank piece of paper and think, what the hell am I going to do? And let something come up. I think that is there a pattern in the work that you do? If you can see actually a tapestry instead of a pattern, probably people are more creative.
Nice. I love that. A tapestry. So, just going, I know we're jumping around a bit, so forgive me. But just going back to the global question that I posed earlier, and sort of zooming back and looking at, say, education right now. What are your thoughts on? So you've mentioned like the Far East and Japan and China and those sorts of education systems. But what do you think about an education system, say, for example, across Africa, which is very different, or even, I guess you could go to some parts of the Middle East and see a very different equality when it comes to education and access to education. You got any thoughts on education and equality?
Well, I think it's a profound question. I think it's very current in the state of affairs in the world. There is a nice anecdote about Holland. We are rated as, of course, Holland is not as equal as Norway or Sweden, but it's in the right percentile, I'd say. One of the nice anecdotes about the Dutch education system, if you look at higher education in Holland, none of the universities in Holland makes the top 10, but almost all of them are in the top 100 universities. For me, that says something about inequality. So the best ones, of course, are Yale and MIT and Oxford in England, but do they cater to the common man, or do they not? I don't think they do. And even in Holland, I think getting into university, coming from, I think it's more of a cultural, inequality. Has your family known learning? Has it valued learning? Do you have your grandparents valued learning more than are you affluent enough to pay for it? I think it also is a factor, of course, but I think inequalities is when it's not financial, it's cultural, and I think that's going to be the next frontier in inequality. Not as much racial, but as much as, well, the experience of having learned to your full potential in your parents and grandparents. Yeah,
that's fascinating. So I guess the next question is looking down the tunnel into the future. How do you get somebody who perhaps their parents, their grandparents have not valued learning? How do you encourage them with a whole new way of learning to engage in an education system that will equip them well for the future?
This is a very profound question. I hope, and I would love to train all teachers, all educators, all trainers to spot latent potential, let's say that, latent talent in their pupils and students. Because in my vision, it often takes two people to tango. It's not only the pupil, it's not only the student, it's not only the background, it's very often somebody who sees something in you that you yourself don't see yet, who can help spark that curiosity.
That's wonderful. So I think what that insight sort of says to me is I don't think we're all going to be sat there watching stuff and call that an education. What you're talking about there is a very human connection that the teacher and the pupil will have, because the teacher then can discern that latent talent, like you mentioned, to be able to extract that from the pupil and amplify it and encourage it and excite that, and as you say, ignite the torch paper and set it off. Without that sounds like a dead education if we just sort of plonk kids in front of computers all day long.
Completely agree, and your words resonate with me, where it's about ignition and sparking. You can almost say, and there is research that solidifies this, where it's actually creation. So when I see something in you that you don't yourself see, I might just be completely wrong. But by the fact that I trust you, by the fact that I see in you that you can do it, you can do it. You sort of lend the confidence of the other in order to feel that you can do it.
It's like you imagine or you dream it up before it happens, and the confidence to get there. Fantastic.
I did a talk a couple of years ago where I actually talked about this, and it was fermenting in my brain as a sort of concept. And I was speaking about this, and a woman stood up and she said, "I've experienced this." And I said, "Wow!" So there is this temporary agency in Holland called Randstad, and I think Steve Jobs was the first one to say, "Everything you see around you was actually discovered by somebody. It wasn't there always. It was discovered by somebody." So she actually went up to the director of Randstad and he said, "I want you to found this department." And she said, "But what is that?" And he said, "I don't know. I just think it's possible." She said, "Is there a track record? Has anyone else done that?" And he said, "No, I don't think so." And she said, "It's my first job. How can I do it?" And he said, "I think you can do it." So it was double. She had no track record of doing it because it was never done. And he instilled his confidence in her and she did it. That for me was such a profound moment of thinking, wow, there is truth in this.
That's amazing. That's absolutely phenomenal. And I think it's going to take brave leadership, like you've just explained, to step forward into this unknown. You know, and brave parenting, I guess, because those of us that are parents, that are raising kids, you know, we're going to have to be brave to say, do you know what? We need a different type of education because the future is different to the past. And, you know, we've never lived in a robotic era before, right? So we don't, no one really knows what the education needs to be for success to be there. But we do know some things, and that is repetitive tasks can be now done by robots. Information we can access. So there's things like that. What other thoughts kind of come to mind in terms of that new future? Have you got any ideas? Like, what's your vision? What's your dream?
Well, my dream would be to keep on learning, to keep on self-discovering, to keep on adapting, really. If work that you do falls away because the robots have taken it over, I'm actually teaching quite a bit less than I used to, because everybody can find things online. What I'm doing now is facilitating learning between pupils, or between people in companies. So what I profoundly hope is that we will look upon the future as an opportunity to keep on learning and growing and fostering and flourishing new talents within us. And I think it's going to be a wonderful time.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time with me today, Evert. That's been really, really exciting, and I really appreciate you giving up your time to help us and the team at We Are Not Robots for the Meta Skills Challenge with Marty Neumeier. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and all the best.